Welcome, everyone, to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and in today's session, we get to continue with the CTC Analytics Learning Series. Just getting started with, just dipping our toes in the water of the Analytics API that's available to you. So, as always, of course, these webinars are recorded, and if this is a topic that in the future you need to refer back to, this will be up on our YouTube channel very shortly here after this live presentation. For those of you who are here participating in the live presentation, if you have questions about today's topic, then I encourage you to leverage the questions window in GoToWebinar. I try to answer those questions live, but we also save a QA session for the end of the live presentation here, and we'll be going through any questions we can't answer live. With that, let's jump into the topic here and take a look at what today's discussion is all about. So we've said this before in this series, in our modern culture, data really is king. And really, data is only king if you have the ability to leverage that data to make, data-driven decisions. What that can do is it can empower us to be much more productive, direct our spending efforts better, make our projects run more smoothly, save us time. All of that comes from the actual information that we can gather. So building on the previous discussions, this session specifically today is going to talk about navigating the whole collection of data sets within CTC's Analytics API. We're going to talk about all the nuances of the available information. We're going to dig into the kind of core of that preliminary analytics. We're going to be laying the ground for some future work that we're going to do in the rest of this series. And really the whole goal here is to help you understand how you can capture this information and ask the right questions of the data once you know what's there. So we're going to be going through all that today. Now we're going to be talking a bit about the potential of leveraging CTC's analytics. We are going to be talking also about how you can obtain access to this, to get access to this raw data. There are some steps you will have to take, so you may not be able to follow along with me 100% today unless you've already taken some of these steps, but I'll share with you exactly what you need to do to be able to take advantage of this moving forward. We're going to take a deep look at the reporting data structure, and then we're going to establish for ourselves an outline for the future sessions for how we're going to actually go after this information. And for those of you who already have experience using some kind of programming language and already have experience going after web API information, you'll probably just take this information and run with it. For those of you who don't have that experience, well, that's what the future sessions are for. We're going to be talking about that here. And let's just talk about where we are in this whole overall roadmap of this series of presentations talking about APIs and reporting data. So we talked already technically about the installation and configuration of PAL. We talked about project and project model management. We went through the online available stock portal dashboards, and that was all in the previous 3 sections. Today, we're talking about getting started with the reporting API, and we're doing this so that we are setting a foundation for the next 4 major parts, which is using that reporting web API to extract custom reporting via Excel and Power BI. We're going to leverage Python programming language to harvest this data into JSON files, if that's the route you want to take. We're also going to use that JSON data to write data into a SQL Server. So we're going to set up and work with a SQL Server database, and also potentially a PostgreSQL database, if that's what you prefer to use. I'll show you kind of 2 different ways of doing that. And then we're going to talk in the final part about automatic refreshing of that data. So for you, it's mostly hands-free. And all you have to do is set this up once and then be able to leverage that data in a lot of different ways in the future. So first off, though, when we're talking about getting started with this reporting API, one of the things I want to talk about is the potential that you have with this. Why do you care about this in the first place, right? We have those online web reports, and you're like, hey, this is great. I can get some online data about my usage of CTC's tools. I can get online information in stock reports about my project performance or how my CMS is running, the content management system, or what users and groups I have in the CTC portal. I can get this information, and that's great. So why do we care about this? Well, there's a couple of things that online system doesn't really let you do, and this is why we care about the API. First off, with the API, you can do some custom stuff. You can do things that matter directly to you for your firm. So we're going to be able to enable custom reporting, the ability here to really track and organize and design your own reports, whatever it is you want, married up with whatever systems you need to marry it up with. That's all a potential here. You'll also unlock more than 30 days of history. With the report, you can pull, a year worth of information. You can store that information and then only have to refresh small pieces of it. So it's going to make it a lot better for you in the long run if you need more than 30 days of information. And most of us really do. If I want to know how I've been using the tools all year long and what months are hotspots, well, I can only know that if I have more than 30 days. And the web reporting, well, that stock reporting only provides you 30 days, but the API can give you way more than that. You may want to integrate this with some of your internal data systems as well. Maybe you're using, I don't know, what's it called, Deltek Vision for your timekeeping, and you're building projects in there. Well, maybe I want to take the Deltek Vision information, what's billed on projects, and I want to take and marry that up with how much time was actually spent in Revit on projects and how many actions were taken and where that time was spent in projects. So you can leverage this API to marry those two systems together when you have both of the sets of data in the same environment, something you can't do, again, in a stock web environment. And then finally, and what I kind of like doing with this is, hey, you get to learn a new skill, right? This gives you more information, the ability to work more with data, and you get to work with a new technology that can help you out to achieve these upper three items, right? So there's reasons why, this is kind of a meaningful thing for you, skill development, but also the integration of data, more than 30 days of history, and your own custom reporting. So now let's talk about the next major step. How do you get access to this raw data? How do we actually access it? How do we navigate it? How do we all this stuff, right? So first off, the step number one is you need to get a reporting API key from CTC, right? This is going to unlock your access to your data that's stored in the portal. It's key locked to your account. If you don't have that, well, then the data is just not going to give you anything because it doesn't know who you are and what information to fetch. So to get that reporting API key, you're going to want to reach out to licenserequest@ctcsoftware.com. If you reach out to them, email them and say, hey, I'd like to get a reporting API key. Well, they'll send you one back. And that's fantastic, right? Because then you can follow along once you have that. And in fact, for future sessions, you're going to want to make sure you reach out and get that license request API key as soon as possible. Heck, do it right now. Maybe you get it in the middle of this webinar. I don't know. So reach out to them and ask for that license request API key. The next thing that you're going to want to do is get some of the source code that I'm using, some of the source files and source content, and some of the files that we'll be using throughout the rest of this discussion. And I'm going to keep this area up to date, but to do that, you're going to want to go get a GitHub repository that I have. Here's the little web link for this. If you go into this GitHub repository, you can get individual files if you want out of there, or you can clone the entire GitHub repository. The best way personally that I know to do this is by using a tool called GitHub Desktop. You can download that directly from GitHub itself. And what it will let you do is clone a repository by just putting in this HTTPS path, github.com, Sean Z's code, CTC_reporting_API. You put that in, you say, clone it to this folder on my computer, and it will copy everything down. And the nice thing about GitHub Desktop is, as I update this repository throughout the rest of this series over the next couple of weeks or next few weeks, you will be able to just very easily pull that latest information and refresh it directly from GitHub without having to go up there manually and download stuff. Or you can go up there manually and download stuff. The important stuff for today relates to a toolkit that we're going to talk about here in a moment called Postman. And so in order for me to be able to navigate this, what I'm going to do is actually go to github.com. I'm going to go to this repository here, and I want to navigate to the folder that you're going to care about most today. It's this folder right here called API Essentials. this API Essentials folder, you pretty much want everything out of here for this session and for the next session. We'll be focusing mostly on this, and for today specifically, it's the reporting API postman setup. There's these JSON files that exist inside of here. There's a document that tells you how to use this, but we're going to go through this specifically today. These are files that you're going to want to be able to navigate following along 100% or nearly 100% with today's discussion. And you'll actually be able to run stuff through here to get preliminary data for yourself when you have that API key. So it's this folder that you want initially. It's the API Essentials CTC Reporting API Postman Setup. You can get access to this stuff real easy. All right. Now, minor disclaimer as we go through the rest of this series. The API itself, I'm going to go to this README document right here in the beginning of my repository. The API itself is supported by CTC software. CTC does support the reporting API. However, all of the code that I am distributing here through this repository here on GitHub, this is my personal stuff. This is my personal code. I'm putting this together so I can learn the API and so that I can easily share with you stuff that I've learned. So CTC does not support anything that is directly within my Git repository. You're going to have to write me, to the YouTube channel, and I will be more than happy to talk with you about that, just because this is like stuff that I'm, tinkering with on the side. So I just want to make that clear. CTC does support their API, that is the actual calls and the ability to get information, but how I'm implementing it, that's on Sean Zerbis here. That's me doing this work here for you. So just so you know, if you call out to like one of our partners, one of our reseller partners, and you're like, hey, Sean said this thing can do a thing and he's got this code base, they're not going to know how to support you because this is my code. So just want to make that clear. Little early disclaimer here for you. So with that said, the Postman web application is going to be an important little toolkit for you, and you can get it by going to postman.com, and it's free. In fact, everything that I'm talking about today is technically free. It has no extra cost to you. You just have to go sign up for something here and be able to work with this content. So postman.com, and in fact, I have postman.com opened up here already, and I'm going to be using this. I'm going to walk through the setup because we're going to be navigating through the web API via this Postman toolkit because I find it to be the most elegant way and the most friendly way to actually navigate and see what it's doing. So you're going to go to postman.com. You're going to sign up for a free Postman account, just your work email or your Gmail email. If you want to use that instead, that's fine. And then you're going to build yourself a workspace, which we're going to step through together here. And you're going to import the API Essentials CTC Reporting API Postman setup files directly into that workspace. And that's my next step. I'm going to do that with you here so that we can all have the exact same experience with how this data is going to work. So from that Postman environment, to make yourself a workspace, first off, when you first sign up, you'll have a default workspace. I've deleted my default workspace because I completely messed it up learning how to use this, and I have made for myself a CTC reporting workspace, and there's also a new series will be coming out here in the near future with talking about automations within the system as well. But this reporting workspace is one that I made, and the way that I made that is I clicked on Create Workspace, and I just made a blank workspace. Nothing special about it, so I clicked Create Workspace, blank workspace here, click Next, and I'm going to give it some kind of a name. So I'm going to call this CTC Reporting Webinar for today. So I just have one for today. And this is just a workspace that's just for me. It's just my personal workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. Now with this workspace, it has no collections, it has no environments, it has no history, it's got nothing. It's blank. Remember, we just created a blank workspace. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import into this workspace some files. And this specifically is where those files come into play. So I've already cloned that GitHub repository locally. And if you've taken and gotten just the API Essentials content here, it's got an Excel file, it's got some Power BI files, and it has this Postman setup directory. If you grab these .json files here and simply drag and drop them into that little environment, all 5 of those will be there. There's 4 collections. There's one environment here. We'll take a look at how these work together in just a moment, but all you have to do is import these and they will appear over here to the left. So I've got a PAL reporting API, I've got the CSL, the CMS, and the accounts APIs all sitting in here ready for me to leverage them. Now, every once in a great while, it kind of doesn't like something that I've done, like my CSL is empty, it didn't import properly. So what I'll do for that is I'll simply I'll hit the little row right there, hit the little ellipsis button and say delete it, so it goes away. Looks like, yeah, my PAL one actually worked fine. So the CSL one didn't work on this import for whatever reason. I'm gonna go ahead and do import again. I'm gonna jump back into here. I'll grab the CSL collection here for JSON and just drag and drop it there. Let it re-import that CSL, and it should bring it in and organize it here. And now I've got this reports subfolder. So this is what you want to see. If you expand out these top level folders here, you'll see reports. And inside the reports folders, you'll see some little request options inside of here. And we'll navigate through today what these actually mean and how we're going to leverage them. Additionally, to the left, you have this environment option over here. And what you'll have is the CTC API environment that relates to this collection within this webinar area here. Now, this is where your reports key comes into play. You need to get a reports key and put it here in the current value. 0000000 will not give you anything. So you're going to have to get a reporting key from CTC using that license request at ctcsoftware.com and just dump it into here and then save it once you've done that. So just place that reporting key in there, and we're going to see how that works here in a moment. So I am going to go and actually switch my workspace here for the one that I've already established is identical to this, except for my reporting key is actually already filled out. So here's my CTC reporting collection. You see I have a CTC API environment here, and my reporting key is chilling over there, and I'm going to be able to use that throughout today's discussion. Now, this is hooked up to my little side company. The whole goal here is that you know, I can show you some data from my little collection, but this data is not going to mean anything for you. So this will be pretty much useless for you. Now, for any of you who have participated in a legacy version of this webinar, last year I did one like this. I believe that I have updated some of these collections. So you might want to throw away the collections you've had and re-import the ones that are there now, because there've been some new functionality added, specifically around the content management system, the CMS area here, and I believe also about the accounts area. There's some new options inside of there that you might care about. So you probably want to throw these away and just go get the ones that are up there in that report and re-import them. The environments over here, this is the exact same, and if you had a reporting key from then, it still works today, so should be good to go. All right. So that is the importing of those settings directly into a new workspace. And now we're going to take a look at examining this data structure and see what those workspaces actually do for you, because we're going to use this to understand what is actually available. You know, we talked in the previous session about what's available in the web portal, and that's great stuff. But now we're going to dig deeper and see all of the extra information that's actually here. There is a ton of information, and in future sessions, we're going to talk about wrangling that data to make it actually useful to us in some form and fashion. So let's examine this data structure a bit and see what's going on inside of here. So first off, let's take a look at the accounts little collection of data here. We're going to be specifically focusing on organization users, so users that you create at your company that can access your licensing and your libraries, your groups, your organization groups, which includes your users, and it talks about the association of your users to your user groups and what extra rights those groups provide them for administration privileges. And then we're also going to take a look at invited users. So if you've invited external users from outside companies that you're partnering with to look at your libraries, you can actually see who those users are, and in some of the future stuff, what libraries they've got access to. So this is something that's a little more tricky to see in the stock web interface, But via reporting structure, it makes it really easy to filter this down in a way that's meaningful to you. So we're going to take a look at these three things from accounts. So I'm going to go step by step, collection by collection, and we're going to take a look at each of these in today's webinar before we're complete. So I'm going to jump back here into Postman, and I'm going to expand out the accounts. I'm going to expand out the reports, and you'll see here there's actually 4 requests that are available to you here. You can get users, you can get groups, you can get invited users, and you can even get what the role values mean, the description of those role values. And so we'll take a look at all 4 of these real quick here and see how we can run this. We're going to go over some real quick essentials for Postman so you can see how this works with these simple requests, okay? So to the top right, up here, top right corner, right now you'll notice this says no environment, no environment. Now remember, over here in environments, we have one. It's called CTC API. It has our reporting key, and that reporting key is important because it's going to get used right here. You could dump the reporting key in right here, but the problem is if you decide to ever change that value for whatever reason, regenerate it, maybe that key somehow grows legs and somebody leaves your firm and you want to reset it, you can always request a reset of that key, again, from license request at ctcsoftware.com, or to get a new one if you don't have one yet. But this right now, you'll notice if I mouse over reports key, it says it's unresolved. It doesn't understand what's going on. And that's because it's not defined in either global settings or the collection that I'm using. So in my case, in my global settings, that's the environment that I'm using. And I haven't specified that yet because it says no environment. So what I'm going to do is drop that list down. And because I've imported that CTC API setting, and because I modified that key and saved it, now I can choose that, and this reports key, when I mouse over it, will actually show me the current value of that key for the scope that I'm in. And now this report will allow me to run it and do whatever it is I need to do with this particular report here, okay? The same thing then holds true over here for groups. Now it remembers what environment I'm in. This will be remembered for my entire session while I have this web page up. It will remember this. So if I wanted to get the groups right now, I could just click send, and it would actually run a command and give me back the response for whatever I'm asking for here. Same thing with invited users, same thing with role values. I can ask for all of this. Now, let's actually run this. Again, talking a little bit about essentials, let's run this to see what this actually looks like. So because most of us are probably going to want to start with our users, I'll start right here. Just start with the users and take a look at what this reporting API actually gives us back. So I'm going to click send over here. You'll notice that there is a big long string of stuff up here. Before I click send, let me actually take a look at some of these options because I want to explain this before we get going too far. Get users by organization. This is what we call a get request in the API world. I'm getting information from a system that's on the web. I'm getting specifically in this case users. I've described it as get users. And what this is doing is it's going to a base URL, which is the API URL here, api.ctcsoftware.com. It's looking specifically at the accounts reports, version 1 reports route of users. So it's going to this particular route. There's a variable that's being passed to it. It's the reports key. So anything after the question mark is a variable, and it says reports key. That's actually this field right here. And the value it's passing is what's in this value column over here. So the reports key equals reports key. And it's passing some other information. It's passing the page number 1. The page size is 1,000 records. That's the maximum this particular API will allow me to get is 1,000 records at a time. It is telling me whether or not I want it to include roles. That's true. So up here it says include roles equals true. It's ordering it by, in my case, last name. So it's using the last name to sort by. And it's ordering that in a descending order. So Z's first, A's last. So it's ordering it descending. All of these options are turned on. If you're like, you know what, Sean, I really don't care about including the roles. Well, you can turn that off. And the response that you get back will actually be physically smaller. It will have less information because it won't be including the roles. If you don't really care about the order the information comes back, you can turn off the order by option and whether it's ordering by descending or not, and it makes this little URL quite a bit shorter, right? But it also means you're getting less information potentially. So these little checkboxes over here are important. The only ones that really matter to the far right are the ones that say required. If you don't give it this, it's just going to yell at you and say, nope, can't give you any information, right? And it has to have a valid reporting key or it won't give you any information. If you don't care what page or what page size you get, I mean, it's going to default to something. It'll default to page 1 and it'll default to 1,000 records. But if you wanted to specifically specify that somehow, you certainly could. But again, notice how if I've unchecked these, this URL up here gets a bit shorter. In my case, I'm going to leave some of these on just so we can see this in a specific order, and I'm going to click on send. As I click send, it reaches out to the API. Now, the user's API always takes just a little bit to get itself going. Once I do this once, the next request is going to be quite a bit faster. But it goes to sleep if it's not actually in use. So the first request every hour basically says, hey, let's refresh this list so that it gives me the latest and greatest information. So it's going to take this a second, but it's going to send it out. And then ultimately, it will come back with a list of up to 1,000 users on that first page. And it's going to give me some, let's try this again. Send it again. Yeah, it just took too long because it was refreshing itself. So Postman has a 30-second timeout. If something takes longer than 30 seconds, that just means that it's going to pause and tell you that you have to try again. Ultimately here, this should pretty quickly come back with an actual response that I should have probably run this before the webinar today so that it already had initialized itself. But we'll give this thing a minute. Anywho, it's going to come back with a response at some point here. There we go. There it came back. It took it 60 seconds to get going. Also, along with this, right, it has these little shortcuts here, base URL and reports key, right? If you wanted to, you could go to the code that backs this up, little bracket / bracket thing here, and this will tell you the full path. Now, we'll be using this full path ourselves as we start to automatically reach out to and call this API to get stuff back, right? We'll be using this. This fully assembles it for you from these little variables right here. It will fully assemble you a path, and if you copy this and you just directly went to a web page and pasted that in, you're going to get all that exact same information back in the exact same way. And you'll notice it's lightning quick when you ask for it, and that service is already up and running and refreshed. So you can get all of this stuff. This is very difficult to read in my personal opinion, so I don't like looking at it this way. What I like to do is look at it in a structured JSON format where it kind of beautifies the information a bit, makes it a little more easy to navigate, easy to read. So all of these requests, when you're getting a pluralized thing here, get users, get groups, get role values, plural, all of these are going to tell you what the total number of items are, and then it'll give you a list of the items, and each item in that list will outline all of its individual properties. You know, email, display name, first name, all this stuff inside of here. When they last logged on, if they're an SSO user, what roles they have directly assigned to them, all kinds of stuff is available inside of here. Whether they're active or not, all that data is just sitting here waiting for you to do something with it, right? So that's the users. Similarly here, if I was to go to groups, there's information here as well in the groups area where I can say, you know, again, page size, which page I want, do I want roles, do I want the members of the groups, how do I want it ordered, you know, is it ordered descending or ascending? And if I send this, it's going to go get me, in my case, the 20 groups that I have defined for my organization, what their names are. Within here, ultimately, since I have member IDs, it's going to give me the ID of each of the individual members that are a part of this particular group. And it's going to tell me if there's any roles assigned to it. This particular group has no extra roles assigned to it, so there's nothing here. It's just an empty list. But the member IDs, it does tell me that there's a member inside of here. And I could go get more information about that user by asking the users list or looking through the users list to find this particular ID. I can also see if there's users who are invited to my organization, right? This particular one takes a little longer. I'm not going to ask for this one, but you certainly can. And it'll tell you to include the invited libraries IDs as well. So it'll give me, you know, the page size. You know, if I've got more than 1,000 people, it'll, you know, have more than one page. but it'll give me library IDs, and I can marry that up with the CMS library IDs later on to see exactly what the names of those libraries happen to be. And within the actual users and groups inside of here, you'll notice that there's those role assignment values, 900, for example. What does that even mean? What's 900 mean? Well, if I go to get role values, this is a very short little request, but it'll tell you role value 100 means that they're an organization admin directly assigned. 200 means they're a user admin. Down here, 900 means that they're a CMS admin. And so I can see what roles are assigned directly to the individual users based on the ID value that's stored in the database. And those ID values, they tie to, all of the users, the groups, the invited users. I can leverage that to understand what rights they've actually got, okay? So that's the accounts little API here. It's fairly simple. It's just getting a list of users, getting a list of groups and associated user IDs, getting invited users and library associated IDs, and then the role values that apply to all three of these. That's what the accounts little collection here does. So let's take a look at another part of the API. We're going to repeat this exact same thing for these other sections. We're going to take a look at the PAL data, the project activity log data. Now, early on in this series, day one, presentation part one, we talked about installing the project activity logger and getting it configured so you're able to get Revit project activity data. This PAL API, this endpoint, is what's going to give us that information back. We talked about organizing projects. This PAL API, again, is going to talk about the projects that we have defined and organized inside that environment. Now, we were able to take a look at 30 days of project history, but now we're going to be able to take a look at a lot more by using this PAL information here. So what does it give us back? Well, it gives us back the individual sessions, Revit session by Revit session for each Revit model, and it gives us back the associated project information that relates to those individual sessions, if there's project information available or if it's just orphaned in space and it doesn't have a project. Either way, we're going to be able to go after every single piece of data that the project activity logger has logged into the system, and then we can start to analyze what that information looks like and maybe make decisions about organizing projects or training team members. So this only shows 2 items, but there's actually quite a bit of information here. Let's go take a look at it. So back in the Postman environment over here, if I go into the PAL collection, I'm starting here at the bottom on this one because we've so far been talking a lot about the project data in this series, and so I want to focus on this area first. So we have a couple of significant get endpoints here. Get doc sessions, plural. So if I click on this, notice how it's going to have a page number here, page number, page size. It's going to have an order by. In my case, I like to order by the date. It has a descending sort here, so I can get the newest stuff first and the oldest stuff will be listed later. I'm going to use that strategically later on. Notice this also has a start date and an end date. So if you don't specify anything for this, the default is start today, right now, and go back 30. So it's 30 days. It's 1 month of time. If you specify a specific start and end date, like start date might be today, but the end date might be 6 months ago, you could get 6 months worth of data, right? So just by tweaking these little properties right here, you can modify this, and notice how it's in 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day time format here. If you put that in, it's going to let you do that, all right? I'm just going to send this for the last 30 days, and we're going to see what we get back. So this has 36 records for me for the last 30 days. That's because I don't do a lot of production work. Many of you are going to have a lot more than that. So just for the last 30 days, it has that, and it tells me the project ID that this particular session is associated to, the organization ID, which is my company, the machine name this was run from, my computer, the username that was running it on that machine, what server or central path this particular model was saved on or opened from, the local file name, the local file path on the user's computer, the version, a file size in this case, the Revit version, right? It's going to have all kinds of information about this one little session, just a little bit of the information. So I can go ahead and get that for that particular session, right? There's also the ability to get more session information by a particular session ID. So if I wanted to say, well, they opened up Revit, and in that session of Revit, what was the ID for it? I could get that specifically as well. So if they opened up Revit in the morning and opened up 17 models, well, I could understand exactly what those 17 models were by session ID if I wanted to go ahead and get all of the Revit sessions. So once again, similar things here, but this is just getting sessions of Revit being open, not models, but sessions of Revit being open. So it's giving me that. And again, here's a session ID. There are get projects, plural, projects. Okay, if I get projects by organization, once again, similar deal, page number, page size, order by, in this case, a project number. I can send this and see all the projects that have been defined in the system, and I can get a project number information. I can get the name of the project. I can get the ID of that project. And now I'm going to use this to do something interesting here. So far, we've been just getting the plural objects, okay, plural items. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this ID, which is required for my next request, and use this to get information about a particular project, singular. So if you organize these into project buckets, you can actually isolate and figure out all of the models that are associated and all the sessions that are associated to it. For this, the get project by ID, I need to have an actual project ID. Remember, over here to the right, the description is going to tell you what is required and what is not required. So if I want to get more information about this, I can paste that GUID or that universally unique identifier over here. And in addition to the reports key and that unique ID right there, then what it's going to do is tell me all the paths that are associated, tell me all the permissions that are associated. When I send this, it's going to go get me all kinds of extra information about it, tell me all the project paths, what project IDs they're associated to, who added it, who updated it. All of that information is now going to be available to me, and I can extract this information about this PAL data and get really, really rich information about the usage of Revit at my company and how my projects are working out. Okay, so there's a lot of information you can get here. We're going to use this strategically later on. Now let's talk about the next item in the list, cloud shared licensing. Recently, I've been having a lot of customers call in saying, hey, I want to dig deeper into my licensing information. This is one of the big benefits of using cloud shared licensing is the ability to ask it and interrogate the data and ask it questions that you want to know about how your team is using tools. So the cloud shared licensing really gives you one thing. It gives you license usage data. It tells you how many licenses you have, which is a pretty easy thing to go fetch from the portal, I suppose. But you can also start to see when those licenses are being used by who on what computers, right? So that gives you a bit more info. Let's take a look at that real quick. This is a small one. If I go back here and I take a look at the CSL data, let's collapse accounts and project activity data. In the cloud shared licensing reports, there's three things here. This will give you a list of the individual products that are available from CTC. There's 14 distinct things that can be licensed, and it tells you the ID of that object and its readable name. The get licenses for the organization. Now this will just, if I hit send, it will tell me, in this case, what product ID my licenses relates to. There's 10 total items I have licensed. What product ID it relates to. It will give me the readable name for that as well in this case, the serial number from the site, subscription start and end date, how many licenses, if it's purchased or trial, if it's auto-renewing, who last updated it, right? And then it also tells me permissions for what groups can actually access that or users can access that license. So I can see who has access to it. Also, you can go in here and you can see individual distinct sessions. Now again, on the web portal, you only get 30 days of this. But here, you could request as much as you want. In my case, I'm just going to let it be the default 30. I'll hit send here, and we'll see something probably a little bit specific that's going to give us a trigger for some of our next conversations. Oh, I guess not. I only have 252 total sessions in the past 30 days of tools here at CTC, but I can tell what product they were using. I can see when it started and when it ended. So how long they were in there, I can derive from the maths on this. I can see what computer it was run on, what user was leveraging it, specifically the application that was running, or I can use this to filter data out if I want to as well, because I can, once I get the data in a report, I can filter stuff away that I don't really care about perhaps. I can see what Revit version they were using and the subversion of Revit as well, so I can see if all my team is up to date on the same Revit version number and build number. And I can also see the session ID itself. So I can see information about these tools and every session of these tools at play. Oh, and I can also, by the way, see the CTC build number of this as well. In this case, looks like I was using Hive 24.5 in this when I ran this earlier today, actually. This is, by the way, in UTC time. So for me, being Central Time, I'm going to offset that number by, what, 7 hours, I believe, is what it is, to offset from UTC. Anywho, you can get all of this information for as far back as you'd like. And if you want to go even farther back, what I recommend doing, by the way, is going in 30-day chunks. So from say, November of 2020, I can check from that to December of 2020, and then go December 2020 to January 23, or rather January 21, and just keep stepping forward month at a time. And that'll give me the information really quick. And if I'm storing that in an efficient way, which we'll talk about in a couple of sessions here, I'll be able to get my history as far back as I want to go for as long as I've been using cloud shared licensing. Okay, let's talk about the final little collection here, and then we'll talk about some strategies. The CMS is by far the biggest collection of data. There's a lot of information stored inside of there, and if you're using the content management system, you can actually do quite a lot with this information, all the way from checking your standards to checking the validity of your content, when it was updated, last used, all kinds of stuff. So this is all of the content that you store in the CMS and all of its detailed information. So all of its types, its parameters. If you can search it in Hive, you can pull it here in the reporting API. You can find all of the library information and all of what content is associated with which libraries, library permissions, both internal users and external users. You can dig up all that information. You can see everything about your tags, every piece of content your tags are associated to, what tags you have, when they were last touched, edited, searched, all of that. You can see detailed search information, whether it be run from saved searches or interactive searches. So there's a lot of information that's available here in searches, exactly the filters that were used, exactly the search strings, all of that. You can see everything about it. And if you're leveraging the family standards and family checking portion of the CMS, well, you can see the family checking reports in here as well. So a lot of information about all of that content. Let's take a little bit of a look through. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. We're going to dig way more into this later on, but there's a couple of things that I want to point out specifically relating to the CMS and the content in this case, because it's a lot more of the same kind of interaction with Postman, but when we get into the CMS, you're going to see a ton more data. So far, I haven't had much more than 200 some odd records. But now in my content environment, if I get all of the content by my organization, just hit send here, you're going to see there's going to be a lot more information. 7,500 or almost 7,600 items in the list. Now remember, I'm only getting 1,000 items at a time. So when I'm seeing the actual items listed here, it's the first 1,000 of 7,500. We're going to use that strategically a little bit later on as we talk about how to get more from this system and why having some kind of extra toolkit at play beyond just Postman is going to be really important. For me to get all of this information, if I'm only able to get 1,000 items at a time, because web APIs are typically throttled in how much items they can fetch for you at any given time, it's going to take me 8 iterations to get this. The first one I've already got. This is page 1. But if I wanted the next page, I have to tell it, well, go after page 2. Send that information. And this is now page 2 of that, giving me another 1,000 records of data about my content. All right. Now, if you remember, I mentioned earlier that anything that's pluralized up here, contents or tags, plural, get libraries, plural, right? It's going to give me a list of all the base objects. So in the case of contents, it's giving me a list of the content. This is the ID of that piece of content.
This is it's general information. Is it an imperial piece of content? Is it a Revit family? What's the file name for it? You know, right? All this basic stuff. There's a Revit category stuff again. What's the source? You know, all of this. But then it stops. But there's a lot more information about this family that I want to go after, right? There's files that are actually inside of there for different Revit version years, potentially. There are types within those pieces of content. There's parameters within those types. Those parameters have a lot of rich data that I might want to go after. But I can't show it all right here because this is just giving me just the general summation of, hey, you've got a piece of content and this is its ID, right? I can go through and look at any one of these or any number of these and figure out, like, what are these individual items here? Where is it stored, right? Is it stored all in the cloud or whatever? So I can see that kind of information as well. But if I want to dig deeper, if I want to dig in and get more information, let me go back to page 1 here, because I think there's a piece of content that I want on page 1 that'll give me some rich information. Let's see, starter project. I probably should just use the search here. Let's look for door. So the category name is doors. That's not the one that I want. Let's go to the next one. Schedule, door holder. Oh boy, I should have figured out exactly which one I wanted right away. Double flush acting, this is a good one. This is a good family or file here. So this particular component, this .rfa file, I want to go after this one. So I'm going to get its ID, because if you remember when we were taking a look at project stuff, I had to go get the project ID, and then I was able to ask for that project in detail. Well, now I'm going to copy a content ID, and we're going to get content data in detail. And we're going to start talking about a lot more information that we can go after within the CMS-based data here. Oops, wrong area. Undo, just kidding. Let's go to the GUID. That's what I wanted to replace. Oh, shoot. I uncopied it. Let's go grab, there we go. All right, I'm going to send this request, and we're going to get back information. Now, this is getting a piece of content by its content ID. Also, let's review this left-hand little check series over here. This lets me turn off and on different kinds of information and organizing it in different ways. So here, I'm telling it to include the individual files that are associated to this content ID record. I'm including the types that are associated to that file, individual by file. I'm including the parameters that are associated by individual type. I'm including what libraries and attachments, and if it's been downloaded by users, and what files it's been loaded into, what project IDs it's been loaded into. If there's any extra attached documents, if there's any reviews on it or revisions to this content, or what tags are associated by ID, and if it's been favorited by anybody in my company. And also I can include user data about just whether or not it's been searched, right? So there's a lot of information that's here, and it's gone and got me a huge data record about a single piece of content. Now, just to kind of show you the scale of what this looks like, because every individual piece of content within the Hive CMS has a ton of rich data, we're going to take a look at this in a slightly different way here. I'm going to go back to that little web page technique that I used earlier just to show you the sheer scale of data. Paste this in, let it rip. Right, look at the scroll bar over here. This is one piece of content and the information that the Hive CMS understands about that one piece of content. That's all tracked in the back-end system that the CMS is able to return to you very quickly. And for that matter, the web API is able to return to you very quickly as well. There's a lot of information. And again, this is a very terrible way of looking at that data. So that's why I like looking at it here in this structure, because it's a bit more readable to me. So within here, I'm going to collapse some of these items so that we can quickly navigate through this a bit. A piece of content has library IDs to which that content is associated. And if I want to know what that library is about, I could go to Get Library by ID and ask for this particular ID. There's information if it was tagged. Do I have any tags? Loads, location. I don't know that I have any tags actually. Oh yeah, tags is empty. This particular piece of content is not tagged at all. So even though I said go after the tags up here, get me them, it's still showing back as empty because there's nothing associated. And that's okay. There's been no downloads of this content. Well, this content's never been used. That's good to know. I can find that out. It's never been used by anybody. Do I even need this in my system? I can know when it was originally updated, when it was last updated, and if no one's ever used it, maybe I should pull it out of the system and reduce how muddy my data is, right? So with this, let's see here, revisions. I can see who updated it and when. Well, this thing was updated one time. It was uploaded and never touched again. And that was done back in 2023, 05/19 at 7 p.m. Universal Time, right? So I don't even know what that means. That's probably like noon here, basically. Back on, what is that, April? I can't tell. Yeah, May 19th, right? So I can tell that kind of information about this piece of content. Now, this isn't the most, useful way to review it, but I can see it and we can understand what kind of data we've got. Also inside of here, for the individual files that are associated, if I recall correctly, there is actually only one file, but for this file specifically, this thing was added that same date and time, added by, I can get the ID and know who that user was. I can understand when it was updated. I can understand if it's ever been checked or when it was, created at whatever from the Windows system as well. Know what its original file path is here, how big that file is. And I can go down below and see there's a components subdirectory. These are the types that exist inside of there. And in that family, there's a 72-inch by 84-inch type. Within that type, there are parameter values. I can see parameter by parameter. They have a parameter that's named analytic construction and what its values are, and if it's a shared parameter or not. And if it is a shared parameter, what its shared parameter GUID actually is. So I can see if it's got a shared parameter GUID here. So you can start to compare every single family that exists inside your Hive library, your CMS library, and you can compare all of their shared parameters to your shared parameter list and get a list of all the families that don't match your shared parameters and start to make an action plan for fixing that. That's one of these advantages you can get through this, because this can give you all this information in a simple report once you write the report. So there's a lot of information. Now let's talk about the final topic for today in the last few minutes. We're going to talk about the data fetching strategy, because we've just talked about this data structure. We've talked about all this rich data that's available to you, but now we have to have some kind of a strategy for how do we get it, right? Because there's a couple of different things that we may have to do. So first off, every single one of the main collections, they always indicate total items. That's going to be important. Remember, if we go back into here, if I say get contents and go to the very top of this list, let's scroll all the way up here. Here we go. Close that find window. This tells me the total items that are available, and every one of these pluralized collections will tell me that. Now, I can use that information because I can use the total items. I can know how many items I'm getting per page. I can do some simple maths and round up to the nearest whole page and say, well, how many pages do I need to run through? And then I can start to iterate each individual page. Get me page 1, give me page 2, give me page 3, all the way up until I've gotten to the end. And then I'll know that I have requested all of the information. So I can use that to my benefit in a data fetching strategy. If the number that's on that total items is less than 1,000, well, then I know that I've got them all in the first request and I don't have to iterate. So I only have to go get one page of information and we're good to go. Now, one strategy that I like to use so that I don't have to wait for a lot of information to come through is when I'm doing this in code as a strategy, my very first request says, get me one item on the first page. Come on now, let me highlight this and edit this. One item on the first page. Give me one, and just give me a page size of 1 so that I can send this, and the API replies very quickly. It just gives me just this one little item here. Whatever the first record is, irrelevant, because I don't care. What I want to know is what's my total number of items, because then I can do the maths and say, well, I know that I want to fetch 1,000 at a time, so 7,500 divided by 1,000 is 7.59, but rounded up to the nearest number, that's 8. So that's 8 pages. And I'm going to set this back then to 1,000 and say, okay, go get me page 1 of 1,000, get me page 2 of 1,000. So that's my strategy that I'll be using in some of the future sessions that we go through. And if you wanted to try to do that, go for it. You could understand how many libraries, how many tags, how many searches have been run. This is actually going to be a really big list because in Hive, typically you have a lot more searches even than you have got content. So you can ask for that kind of information. Now, in addition, item details, well, they already require whatever that item is, its ID, right? We saw that today with projects when I got projects by ID, and we saw it for contents where I said get contents by ID. So once again, we have to have some kind of a strategy. When I go fetch the primary collection up here, I'm going to get a list of, in my case, 7,600 pieces of content. And from that list, for every item in that list, I'm going to go grab its ID, and I'm going to cycle through the get item details for that content by ID and say for every single ID, every 7,500 of those items or 7,600 of those items, go fetch me the ID and store that data. Go fetch the next ID and store the data. Go fetch the next ID. And I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to do it in a very efficient way. In the next session, we're going to talk about how to do this in Excel so I can at least have some data to have in sort of a table format. We'll do it in Excel, which is not the most efficient, but we're going to do it there, and we're going to use this technique because once I get all of the items, again, the ID values, once again, I can call each item detail for each ID. That's what we're going to do. Now, within there, keep in mind, I mentioned this earlier, but every single item that we have has usually sub-details that have options for getting that additional data. In the content area, once again, here in content by ID, notice how there is include files. So if I want the files for a particular content record, I have to have this turned on. If I want the type data, I have to have this turned on. If I don't want the type data, I'll turn off the type and parameter data, and that'll make my returned record that much smaller and faster and give me less to have to work with. If I want to know what libraries it's associated to, I'll include that. If I don't care, well, then I won't include that, right? So you get to choose what you want. But here's an important note. For every single sub piece of data, you will need to have a tab in Excel or a table in a database to store that information because databases don't store structured tiered data very well unless you tell it how to do it. So I'm going to have a content properties table that stores all my properties. And that's going to marry up based on the actual, let me collapse this properties list here, based on the ID of the type ID. Now this component, these family types, they're going to have a table of their own. There's going to be a content ID down here, and I'm going to have all those components relate back to whatever the content ID is. That content file ID, rather, that's going to be associated back to my actual piece of content as a content ID. So we're going to learn how to do all of this as we go through the rest of this series. So right here, I was talking about that data fetching strategy. I just want to recap real quick. Again, we're going to go through the main collections, getting all the items. From those total items, we're going to get the IDs of those items. We're going to iterate through the item details for each item ID, getting all of its data and all of its depth details here. And then each of those item details, we're going to make sure in the next session that we have a place to store the main object, the item details, and every sub piece of detail in a table. That's going to be in our next part. So that's the strategy. I know it sounds maybe a little confusing right now, but we're going to work through it. We're going to dig in together and understand exactly how all of this actually functions here. So let's go and take a look at where we are right now today in this series roadmap. We've talked already about all that stuff in gray. Today's session was getting started with the reporting API. We went through an introduction of Postman, how to set it up, and how to navigate the data structure itself in this session. In the next session, which is part one of actually using the web API, we're going to start as simply as possible to make it accessible for pretty much everybody. Those files that you downloaded today that I recommended that you get from the GitHub repository, we're going to be digging into the Excel file and the Power BI file, the version 3 of those files, and take a look at how we're going to use the strategy that I just outlined to actually pull all of this data. All right? That's going to be in that part. So for those of you who are watching this live and watching this as a recording, I want to say thank you. We always appreciate when you show up to the presentations and participate with us, ask us questions.